Okay, we should be recording here. Um, Again, my name is Carrie with Icon Systems. You are listening to or watching the Accounting Guided Setup webinar series. This is webinar number 2 in the series. The first webinar, we talked about the chart of accounts and the initial steps on getting set up. In this second webinar, we're going to be talking about funds and budgets. Um, Everybody is on mute. I will just have you use the chat box on your platform to send any questions. If any questions don't get answered during the webinar for any reason, I will address them via email afterward. Otherwise, you can certainly feel free to call and email our support team afterward as well. Does anybody have any additional or outstanding questions from last week? I'm happy to answer those here as well. Maybe I should ask, did everybody have a chance to work on their chart of accounts? If you can use the show of hands function to show me if you did or if you had a chance to do that. Okay, so some have. Okay. If not, of course, you can always rewatch or re-listen to the previous webinar. This one is just going to kind of be picking up from where we left off on that previous webinar. So we set up the chart of accounts. We kind of did the first things to get started. And then the next thing, once you get your chart of accounts in, is that you're going to want to set up your fund list. The fund list is found under General Ledger. And we have fund maintenance is what it's called. So when you click on the fund maintenance, you're going to open up that screen. It automatically starts with add a new fund. You're going to go ahead and type in your fund name here. You are going to mark it whether it's active or inactive. Active should be the default. And then whether it is restricted or unrestricted. I have a question here, so I just want to address it. The question is there a way to edit the account classification once it is set up? Okay, so this is coming back to the chart of accounts. So let's back out just a moment here. So on the chart of accounts, once you have something in here and it's set up, like, so I've got buildings that are set up under assets and they're set up as a fixed asset type of building. So you can take and reorganize the chart of accounts a little bit. But something like we kind of talked about the importance of a bank account that you want to mark as, or you want to be able to reconcile. If you don't mark it as checking, let's say you mark it as savings, I cannot take this savings account and I cannot recategorize it as a type of checking. I would have to transfer the money. I'd have to create a second account. So what I call it here, savings. So I'd have to go in, add another account, set it up as a bank type of checking, call it savings, transfer the money out, and then close that account. If you have something more like an expense, these are a little bit easier to move around. So like I've got this state charities expense here in my list. This is a sub account of charities expense, but let's say I didn't want it there. Maybe I want it, and I know this doesn't make sense, but this is just an example because it's what's close to me on the screen. But if I wanted to change this from being under this charities expense and I wanted to move it to this church grounds expense, I can grab that account. It populates at the bottom of my screen down here, and I can change the account position. So I can change it to a different place. I can put it under church grounds. So I can move it, I can reorganize it. But if I wanted it to not be an operating expense and I wanted it to be um, this other miscellaneous expense, I can't do that. I can't do the reclassification. So it's good to get those kind of all set up where they belong in the first part of your setup before you actually start entering transactions. So I hope that answered your question. And you know what, while I still have that open, sorry. One thing I didn't mention in the webinar last week, but I did send out in the email. So for anybody watching this in the future that didn't get the emails, there is a way to print your chart of accounts. If you want to look at it, if you want to make sure everything looks good, go under the general ledger menu item here, go down to GL reports, and there is a chart of accounts report here, and you can go ahead and print it so you can see kind of the structure and everything on paper without having to, scroll through your database. Okay. So back to our fund list. Under General Ledger, Fund Maintenance. It already says add a new fund. We're putting in our fund name, whether it's active or inactive, whether it's restricted or unrestricted, and click on add. It's that easy, and then it's in your list automatically. Okay. Let's go ahead and add another one real quick so you can see again. So my youth fund, if I was adding a new fund to my list, I would never have it as inactive. This is going to be for down the road after we've used this fund and we have no more use for it. Then I would make it inactive. I would come back to this screen and make it inactive. So I'd find that account and I'd say, oh, okay, this is not active right now. And when it's inactive, then when I'm doing my transactions, I'm creating them, I cannot choose this fund as an option in my transactions. So this is for later down the road when you're setting them up, they should be on active. So add a new fund, type in the fund name, keep it active. And then the last field is whether it is restricted or unrestricted. This generally means whether it's like donor restricted or unrestricted. Um, and if you don't know what that means, I would suggest Googling it, but so you get a more precise definition. But are people giving you money for that specific purpose that cannot be used for anything else? Is that money set aside for one purpose only? Then it's restricted. If it's something like your general operating fund, for example, that goes for whatever comes up. That is an unrestricted fund. Okay. And again, you just simply click save. Otherwise, if you've selected one of your funds and you're like, oh no, I need to add a new fund, it's super easy to just clear the fields, go ahead and add in your new fund, carry on. You can also delete funds, but only if they have not had any activity in them at all. If they have had activity, just like your chart of accounts items, you would have to make them inactive. But if they have had no activity, then you could go ahead and delete them. And the nice thing is that if you try to delete something that has had activity, it will warn you and say that you cannot delete it. You must make it inactive. So that is all there is to that screen. It is simply that easy. But next week, we're going to be talking about the beginning balances, and you have to have both your chart of accounts, at least as far as assets and liabilities are concerned, set up, as well as your fund list. Those two pieces must be in place before you can go into the beginning balance screen. So those two, we'll get that set up. And then the other thing I want to talk about today is budgeting. Now, this is the time of year I'm getting lots and lots of calls about budgeting. Let me go here. General Ledger. We have a whole screen right here that says budgets. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I skipped ahead. One more thing I wanted to mention about the fund list. Sorry. Keep going back and forth here. One more thing I wanted to mention is restricted and unrestricted. Some people are still asking about the temporarily restricted. Yes, there used to be an option for that, but FASB issued an update back in 2016 to amend their standards to get rid of that terminology. So we updated our system to accommodate that as well, since it is no longer a FASB standard. Okay, now I can move on to budget. Sorry about that. Okay, so when you click on this budget screen, you'll notice that we have a couple drop downs up at the top. We've got the year, and you know what? I'll make this a little bit bigger just so everybody can see a little bit more. You've got the year for which you're budgeting, the fund, because you can budget by fund. This is the beauty of fund accounting. And then which account type. So you've got your revenues and your expenses, which are going to be your most common. And then there's some of the other ones there as well: other revenues, other expenses, cost of sale, other financial sources. So you'll go ahead and choose those options. Like, let's say I'm going to do other expenditures. No, I'm sorry, not other. I wanted regular expenditures. There we go. And then you can kind of go down the list. So my charities expense, this is my header account. So I don't usually hit this directly, but I'm going to hit my sub accounts. And I might budget those. So I could budget, like, let's say we budget for $5,000 a year to go to my local charities. I can type in 5,000. As soon as I hit my tab key, it auto disperses among each of the months. So the total column is first, and then it goes by month. Oops, didn't mean to scroll down there. And you can see, so I've got 417 here, and then at one point in time, it tapers down to 416, so we get that even 5,000. Now, once I put that in, I can certainly go in and tweak that. So we'll say 400 here, we'll say 425 here, just depending on what your months look like, right? One thing to note about putting in the budget is that you can only put in whole dollar amounts. I can't put in 416.50. It's going to ignore everything after the decimal. It will not round or anything like that. It just takes off the decimal and everything after it. So make sure you're putting in whole dollar values here. You can go in and you don't have to have every month filled in, and I don't have to start with the total either. So I could say, okay, for missions, well, in April we're going to spend 1,500, or we're budgeting for 1,500, and then in November we're going to budget. This one's bigger, so 2,500, and then my total will update accordingly. I can use like my tab keys to go through the fields here. I don't have to use my mouse. The order that the budget screen is in, all of these accounts are in, should follow your chart of accounts. However, some people walk in and they're like, this order is crazy, what happened? You will need to notice that at the top for each of these column headers, the account name, the total, and each of the months, there are two arrows next to them, an up and a down arrow, and you can click on that to change the sort order. So I can sort by my totals, I can sort by my January totals. I can sort by the actual account name. So you just have to be sure that you know what you're sorting for. If you don't want to see all of these columns, maybe you're not budgeting them by month and you don't really care that much about by month, you just want the total and you would rather just hide it, you certainly can. You only have to see what you want to see, or maybe you only budget 6 months at a time, or, you know, the purpose of our screens with these three dots is to be very flexible and allow you to be able to choose to see what you want to be able to see and to sort how you want to sort. Okay, I'm going to go back and put everything back. There we go. You can also filter out things. So that's another thing to be aware of. That if I was only looking for, let's say, total amount is greater than, so what I have in there right now, 4,000, then like a 49.94. So I'm going to say is after or the same as 4,500. So it's filtering out, and it is only showing me the one account with the total that fits my criteria, after or the same as 4,500. I can leave this window, I can close out of my account, and I can come back, and that filter stays in place. These are remembered filters. So if you ever come in and you're wondering where all of your accounts went, what happened, first thing is look. If it's highlighted yellow up here in the upper right-hand corner, that means you've got a filter in place. And this applies everywhere in the system. You're going to find this in your chart of accounts. You're going to find this in your GL register. You're going to find it in your membership side, in your donation side. These three dots are throughout the system, and these filters and this sorting and criteria, the columns you want to see, these are all available in almost all of our screens using these three dots. Okay, so once you get all of your budget numbers actually in, I'm going to make sure I'm under the screen where I had numbers. There we go. So I only have a couple. But once you get all your budget numbers in, you can print a budget list right here. So there's an easy print button right on this screen. Otherwise, if we go over to the GL reports, so under General Ledger, GL reports, there are several reports that are specific to budgets. So we have the annual budget comparison, the annual budget percentage, and then we also have several of them here that actually start with the word budget. So a lot of different reports. I would say that this one is probably everyone's favorite, the budget comparison with variance. But notice that when I'm printing these reports, I can run them by individual fund, or I can run them as combined for all funds. So I can get my whole overview of my budget. I can choose specific months. I also have, not on all of these reports, they don't all have the same criteria options. But this one, I can choose to only print my accounts that have budgets. So I might have other active expense accounts that we use, but we haven't budgeted, and I only want to see the ones that have budgets. Or I've got the option either or. So if there is a budget or if there's activity, I want them to be on this report. Or I just want to print them all no matter what. So if there's zeros, that's fine. I want to see them. You have the ability to not show sub-accounts. So if you want a more condensed version of your chart of accounts and you just want to see, like I have that charities account and below that was my local charities and things like that, I can choose that I don't want to see the sub-accounts. I just want to see the charities and what the total is, that whole group. And then any inactive accounts, because maybe you inactivated an expense account halfway through the year, but the first half of the year you actually had activity in it. So it would make sense that you would want to display that as well. And then, as I have mentioned previously, almost all of our reports in our system have the ability to be printed in all three formats. So you just kind of go through, pick which one you actually like. If there's something, I know sometimes people get some real specifics on their reports that Icon doesn't have, and it should have most everything, but you can always put it into Excel and you can make your tweaks there. Other than the printing the reports, going back to the actual budget screen. So if you were going through and typing things, or maybe you entered the budget and you come back another day and you're like, oh, these are all wrong, I messed this all up, there is a clear all button where I can clear my entire budget under this option here and get rid of it. Or if I'm like, oh, well, this one is the wrong one, I can just take my total, delete it, and hit my tab key, and it says, hey, this account has existing budgets. Yeah, I'm sure I want to clear it, and then it'll clear it out. I'm going to go ahead and just give us a couple of numbers in some random places here. Okay, just so I have a couple random things. So another option that's really cool is when you're in our system for a while, we have this generate budget from previous year. So if you're in our, or maybe not even for a while, maybe you're going to start in 2024, but you want to go back and put in 2023's budget just so you can have that for comparison reports. You can do that because you can go back to whichever year that you want, go ahead and put in the information for that budget. You won't have the actuals, but you'll have the budget. But I can also then generate the budget from a previous year. So there's two different options when I get into this screen. So the first option is to copy the budget from one year to the next. The other option is to generate the budget using the actual dollar values. So if we're just copying the budget, it's as simple as saying, well, I want to copy it from my 2023 year into my 2024 year. And if I already have budgets that I have entered into 2024, maybe I went through and I put 1 or 2 lines in there and I don't want to get rid of them, I'm going to choose this delete option of keep the existing budgets. So do not overwrite them, but go ahead and fill in all the others that I don't have filled in. If you put some stuff into 2024, but you're like, man, it's all wrong anyway, just overwrite it, please. Then you have clear all budgets. So clear everything that was already entered into the 2024 budget screen. I want to overwrite it all with what was in my 2023 screen. Go ahead and copy the budget. So I went back, and now if I go under 2024, I have the exact same numbers. The other option then here from the generate budget from previous year is the using the actual dollar values. You have a little more specifics here. So you can choose either all accounts or you can choose just one. So maybe you want to generate the budget using the actual dollar values of your expenses, but you don't for your revenues because you know this year is going to be a much better year. Everybody's recuperated from the COVID losses and it's going to be a much better year. So our budget's going to be higher. So I don't need to generate the budget from the previous year for this because I'm going to do a better one, a different one than the actual. But the expenditures are thinking now we're probably going to spend pretty much the same. So um, I'm going to copy whatever my expenses were from the previous year, and that'll be my budget. So you can pick those separate ones, or you can do all. And then same thing with funds. I can do all funds at once, or I can pick my individual funds. And again, we have those delete options. Do I want to keep my existing budgets that are already entered into 2024 and only fill in the ones that are blank? Do not overwrite what I've already put into the new year, or um, clearing all budgets under all criteria here. No matter what I have entered here, I'm going to clear everything out of 2024 and overwrite it. Or the middle option here is to actually clear the budgets using the selected criteria. So if I just said revenues in the youth fund, that I'm only going to clear the budgets in this area, but not in all of the other areas of 2024. So you have more specific options here using the actual dollar values. Once you get everything in, it should pop you back to your screen. Otherwise, if you're canceling without doing anything, you can go ahead and cancel and close. So as easy as that. Um, One other thing I want to mention, because this is a big question that I have gotten a lot this year with budgeting, is that people will go through their budget and they'll be like, "Oh, but there's accounts here that we're not going to be using in 2024, like youth trips. We have no youth trips in 2024. How do I get rid of that?" Well, my first thing that I always tell people is, "But have you used it in 2023 or are you going to use it in 2023?" "Well, yeah, we used it in 23, but we're not using it in 24." Okay, you can't get rid of it out of the system until you're done using it in the current year. Because the way you get rid of it from your um, budget list and everywhere else in the report is you go to the chart of accounts, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but you go to the chart of accounts, you pick that particular account, so youth trips, and when it populates at the bottom of the screen, you just say it's inactive. I can't delete it because I've got history to it, but I'm going to say it's inactive. And then I'm going to save it, and now it's inactive. So the issue with me making this inactive now, because I still have a month and a half left of 2023. If I try to run reports for 2023, this isn't going to show up unless the specific reports that I'm running has the show inactive accounts, which other than like the budgets, not very many of them do. Um, if I'm writing a check. So maybe I do have to write another check out for youth trips or somebody's giving money in for that cause or something. I can't pick this account. This account is not an option. When it is inactive, I cannot choose it in any of my operating functions. So if I make it inactive now, it hinders my ability to use it in 2023. It certainly removes it from my budget list. So if I go to my expenditures, and if I go down, I think I had a youth section, yeah. So I no longer have my youth trips in this section, but I can't use it anywhere. So I always tell people don't worry about it. If it's something that you're going to get rid of eventually, go ahead and leave it in the list. Just don't put a budget number for it. Just skip it, just leave it. So we're going to go ahead and make this one I'm going to reactivate it because I need it. Um, and then when I'm in this screen, I'll go ahead and enter in all of my other budget items, but I'm just going to skip that line because I'm not going to use it. And then when 2024 truly rolls around, it's January 1, and we are done with this expense account, then I can go ahead and inactivate it. But you don't want to do that until you're done using it and done getting the reporting for it, for that matter. So if your reporting is a little bit later into January, that you're running reports for December, then don't get rid of it until then. Okay. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but just in case I didn't, when you do generate the budget from the previous year and you copy your budget and things like that, you can still go back in here and you can still tweak it. So even though it copied it, maybe you decided, oh yeah, but we're going an extra $50 this year. I can still go on this one particular line item. I can still go in and tweak it and it'll update everything for me. Okay. So today was a super short webinar compared to last week, I think. Um, The next week's topic is the donation link to accounting and entering vendors, and we'll even talk about customers for accounts receivable. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between accrual-based accounting and cash-based accounting. Did anybody have any questions for me on today's webinar, as short as it was? You can go ahead and throw those in the chat box. Okay, pretty quiet today. On that note, then, I think I will close out our webinar today. As always, if you're going to go ahead and practice this week on whether it be you're catching up with the chart of accounts or you're working now on your fund list and your budgeting and you have questions, you're always welcome to contact our support team. Everybody is here to help. We do have under the help button up here in the right in Icon CMO, you've got our email address and our phone number. You've also got it on that home screen down in the bottom right-hand corner, email address, phone number. We even have our hours of support, and we have a button here where you can schedule a training webinar. So if you want a one-on-one training, um, maybe in addition to or instead of doing this webinar series with us, you can certainly come in here and schedule those. Those are all included in your subscription. There's no added cost for that. And you kind of do the same thing we're doing, but you're one-on-one with the rep and you can kind of ask your questions as you go and they can guide the experience toward your account specifically. So as long as nobody has any last minute questions for me, I will bid you all adieu for the day and we will see you next week. Thanks for joining me.